Have you ever been learning about ancient Egypt and you're reading in a text and you come across a name that is unfamiliar to you of a pharaoh or a god and goddess, only then to find out later that it is someone that you recognize?
I have had that problem, and I hope that today we'll be able to help all of you understand that a bit more here at my friend Osset's History and Mystery School. So join myself, Curtis Ryan Woodside.
And I am Osset at the Goddess Inside, and we are excited to share this series with you of the history and the mystery. So we decided to talk about the name, and because we were just having a chat one day and talking about the different names, and I thought it would be a great way to bring in some of your wisdom, Curtis. So can you talk to us a little bit about ancient Egypt and the history of names and their Greek renditions?
Yeah, well, you know, in the scholarly world, there's a bit of an issue when it comes to which name you use, because there is a Greek given name of a pharaoh or a person or a place, and then there's the actual Egyptian, the ancient Egyptian name, which is how it would have been spelled. Even the name Egypt comes from ancient Greek. It was first known as Aegyptos, which comes from a Greek person would have met someone from Egypt that came from an area called Huit-Ka-Ptah, which is the house of the spirit of Ptah, which is probably a priest or something like that. And saying that quick enough, they probably interpreted it in their own way and wrote it down how they thought that they could spell it, which is just an oral error. Which even, you know, if they came from this Huit-Ka-Ptah, which you can see where they could probably get Aegyptos out of that, that would have been Memphis. And Memphis, as you know, is actually a Greek name, which came from the ancient Egyptian name of Menefer. Before it was even called Menefer, it was Inu. Now it's called Cairo.
I love the transformation of the name over all of these years. And also, you know, the land of Egypt itself, you know, the Black Land was called Kem.
Yeah.
And that's today where we get the land of Kemet, or people who, you know, follow the ancient ways, that they study Kemeticism, or that they say that they're Kemetic.
Yeah. You know, even the name Kemet in Egypt, they at one point referred to it as Kemi. And from there, the Greeks, before they even called Egypt Aegyptos, they called it Kemia. So there's even that little slight change that you can see that was happening. But what's interesting is Strabo actually suggested at one point that Aegyptos was a derivative of just the combination of the words, saying that Egypt was under the Aegean Sea. Yeah.
Interesting.
So you got to choose who you want to believe.
Yes. And so I believe it was, we were talking earlier, I believe it was Herodotus that came over from Egypt, or over to Egypt from Greece. And he wrote a lot about the stories and the history of ancient Egypt within their belief system and their spirituality and their religion. And so this is where we get a lot of the gods and goddesses names that we're familiar with today.
Yeah.
But before we get into the gods and goddesses, I know that also I have come across in my reading, learning more about the history of ancient Egypt, sometimes a name that I'm unfamiliar with as a pharaoh, and I'll look it up. And sure enough, that's the Greek rendition of it rather than the Egyptian. So can you share with us a couple of the pharaohs' names?
Yeah. So Herodotus actually had, he was in Egypt around 450 BC, if I'm correct. Don't quote me on the exact year. So Herodotus went to Egypt. He was one of the first Greek historians to extensively explore and write about Egypt. But the problem was, when he was there, he was hearing a lot of these things, and he had to translate from ancient Egyptian into Greek, and sometimes things got changed. For example, he wrote about Pharaoh Khufu. I refer to him as Pharaoh Khufu because the ancient Egyptians wrote his name as Pharaoh Khufu. However, somewhere along the line, Herodotus decided to not change, but he wrote down what he interpreted Khufu's name as Cheops, which probably came because Khufu's actual name was Khnum Khufui. So that's the full name for Khufu, which means Khnum is protecting you, protecting me. So that is probably how, when he was sitting down talking to people, and at this time, remember, Khufu had already been dead for like 2,500 years. So when he heard Khnum Khufui, it was like Cheops. He just took what parts he could understand. I mean, I can't speak ancient Egyptian, but if we listen to Coptic, you can hear how the pronunciation can be taken in the wrong way. We even know that at one point Khufu was called Khufui, which, is a different way of pronouncing Khufu. And others have actually, let me just check my spelling on this. Sufis is another name for Khufu.
I did not know that.
So Sufis is another name for Khufu, which actually others like Manetho and Josephus wrote about. So even there we get a completely different version from Khufu, Khum Khunuifui to Cheops, and so Sufis.
Right. And it reminds me of like when I went to visit Ellis Island off of New York City, and all of the people would come to America from various parts of the world. And oftentimes their last names would get kind of westernized because the people, writing them down in the books couldn't figure out how to spell their last name based on, where they were from. And so it kind of metamorphosized a little bit over that. So
they just wrote down what they could understand.
Right. And so then, as I said earlier, this also happened with the gods and goddesses. So when you go and you see their hieroglyphs for their name, when I first started studying ancient Egypt, I was very familiar with their Greek names. But then the deeper I got into it, I came across names like Anpu and Asar and Hathor and Nebhet. And I was like, who are these, goddesses? And I realized that it's the actual pronunciation of the spelling of their names in hieroglyphs, where we have the throne for Isis and Asar. It's the As part of that. And then Isis's name will have the little tea loaf and the goddess there. And so that's how we know it's Iset. And then Asar has the eye, which is the ear. So we have the As ear for his name, which I find is all really, really interesting to see how the pronunciation is. And that's something that when you go to Egypt and you see the things on the walls, you can find the gods and goddesses' names because they're actual Egyptian names rather than you're not trying to spell out Anubis. You can actually look for Anpu and find that on the wall.
Yeah. It's nobody's fault. It's literally just someone writing down the way they heard, like you said, at Ellis Island kind of thing. It's nobody's fault, but knowing the ancient Egyptian way of writing the names is much more helpful. We do find examples later on from other writers about different pharaohs with names that you can sort of hear. This is really a mistake. Someone heard it incorrectly. So we have Pharaoh Senusert. And Senusert was called by Herodotus, Senusert was called Sesostris by Herodotus. Yes. Now, a lot of scholars still call him Sesostris because it's actually just easier to say. But with the example of Khufu, I think Khufu is easier to say than Cheops.
I think so too.
Yeah, so we have Senusert, which when you read the hieroglyphs, it's Senusert. Then changed by Herodotus not changed, interpreted by Herodotus as Sesostris. And something interesting that I learned is that Herodotus had written down that Sesostris had conquered Romania.
Really?
That would have been the furthest a pharaoh has ever gone, and there's no proof of this. So this is another example of misinterpretation of facts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
And Strabo actually referred to Sesostris, Senusert, as Sesusis. So you can see where they would have heard maybe from a priest or from someone in the area, they would have heard the name Sinusert, and it would have been said so quick that they could have heard different letters and they just wrote it down. So, yeah. And even the Egyptians, they go between calling him Senusert or Senwosret. And when you say it with the correct accent, you can hear how these mistakes are made.
Yes.
Isis, you can hear. Isis,
yes.
Iset. You can hear. If someone's got a lisp maybe or something, Iset. Oh, Isis. And then you get a Roman who's heard Isis and they go Iside, because they heard Iset and now it's Iside.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So wonderful. Well, thank you so much for sharing all about the history part of things and being a part of this. And so we wanted to invite you all to join Curtis and I for coffee. We're going to have a special coffee chat with all of you and talk more about names in ancient Egypt, share some stories about pharaohs and gods and goddesses, and you'll be able to ask questions and also enjoy coffee with us from anywhere around the world. So there'll be links for that below. Because we both love coffee, right? What's your favorite coffee, Curtis?
I just love any coffee that has a bit of milk in it.
Oh, okay. I really love Turkish coffee. And then this time of year, here in the States, we can get like peppermint mocha coffee. So it's kind of like hot chocolate coffee and peppermint. It's also very good. So, but I'll probably just make my Turkish coffee for our chat.
Okay, with a little bit of cardamom inside, right?
Yes, for sure.
Very good.
For sure.
Yeah, so if anyone wants to hear more about, like you said, the history and stuff, we'll be also talking about different pharaohs' names like Amenophis and Ozymandias and all these weird names that when you hear now, you'll think, Ozymandias, how the hell does that sound like Ramses II?
Exactly. So check out all the links below. There'll be a link to the coffee chat below. There's links to Curtis and I's various websites and YouTube channels. So be sure to follow us and learn more about the history and the mystery. So thank you so much, Curtis, for being here with me.
Thank you so much, Osset, and check in, everybody.
Yes, and thank you so much. And until next time, as always, may you enjoy everything about today.
Ciao.